Hello and welcome to Subpoena Power, a primary debate night for Oklahoma County District Attorney candidates. This is the first of two debates we have tonight. We're starting with the 4 Republican candidates seeking the nomination for Oklahoma County District Attorney. After a short break, we'll have another debate between the 2 Democratic candidates seeking the seat. My name is Trace Savage. I'm the editor-in-chief of NonDoc.com. We're an online journalism publication based in central Oklahoma here. I'm on stage tonight with Storme Jones, News 9's new morning anchor. He's going to get in a 15-minute nap between the 2 debates because he's got to be up at 3 a.m. Storme, I'm glad you survived a car wrek. I really am. So
took a little tumble yesterday. We're doing well.
I didn't want to have to run across the stage, and ask your questions as well. We have a lot of other media partners for this event. Thank you so much to U Central Media, UCO here at the Liberal Arts Building in Edmond. It's a beautiful facility. George, thank you so much for letting us be here. We've got other media partners like Oklahoma Gazette, a bunch of other people I called around today who are streaming this also on their Facebook page. U Central Media is going to be running a fact check for us, so look for fact checks in the coming days. Exaggerate with caution, so be careful, candidates. Real quick, I think I just read your bit,
Yeah,
Storme.
that's fine. News 9 is also streaming this live on our platforms, our apps, Facebook as well. The NonDoc Facebook, you can watch it live as well.
I'm so sorry, Storme. That was a new bit, and we just messed it up immediately.
Fine.
Okay. Debates take a little bit of money and time to produce, so I want to thank our financial sponsors of NonDoc's 2022 Public Debate Series real quick. The State Chamber of Oklahoma, AARP, the Oklahoma Public Schools Resource Center, the advocacy firm of McSpadden, Milner, and Robinson, Oklahoma Association of Realtors, and Overman Legal Group. Thank you so much for believing in public debates, really. Thank you.
And we do want to ask 2 things of the audience real quick. First, consider sharing one of those streams. We are live on News 9's Facebook page right now. Let your neighbors be as informed as you are for being here this evening. And the second, please just silence your phones.
With that, I'll just describe tonight's format. It's pretty simple. We're going to have 90-second opening statements from each candidate. We will then have 3 rounds of questions, and then we will also have 90-second closing statements. We drew straws earlier to determine the order of opening and closing statements. Ms. Jackie Ford, you drew the first straw. Mr. Kevin Calvey will go second, Mr. Galen Gieger will go third, and Mr. Robert Gray will back clean up for us. So with that, Ms. Ford, 90 seconds to you.
Thank you so much, Trace and Storme, for having us here, and I will echo their sentiment of gratitude of folks who are invested in local politics as well as federal politics. What happens in this race has more day-to-day impact on your lives, the lives of your family and your friends and your neighbors, than perhaps any of the other races that are going on. The district attorney's office is a position of power and honor, and I am honored to be the first woman to ever run for this seat. And I'm really, really excited about the ideas that we have for smart justice to bring to Oklahoma County. The more I'm out in the community speaking to voters and community members and a number of our law enforcement friends and people who are impacted by our criminal justice system, one thing remains the same, that the community is hungry for change. And we need to think about how we can move forward with new, fresh ideas to create safer communities, more integrity-driven and transparent policies in prosecuting, so that we can create a better community for all of us to be in. I really appreciate you being here, and I'm looking forward to continuing to answer tough questions with each of you tonight and through the remainder of this candidacy. And I will be asking for all of your votes on June 28th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we can hold our applause till we get to the end of our rounds, that'll help us get through faster. We've got another debate tonight. Commissioner Calvey, 90-second opening statement to you.
Also, thanks to NonDoc, News 9, and all the sponsors, I'd like to recognize my wife and 7 children who are here in the audience. My name is Kevin Calvey. I prosecuted terrorists for the Army. I've seen several death sentences against some of the most evil people on the face of the planet. The Army recognized my skill as a prosecutor by awarding me the Bronze Star Medal. The first reason I'm running is to repair the broken relationship between the District Attorney's Office and law enforcement. This is caused by some wrongful prosecutions by the District Attorney's Office on some police officers, particularly 5 Oklahoma City police officers who respond to an armed robbery in progress. The armed robber disobeys their orders to keep his hands up and reaches behind his back as if he's going for a weapon. They shot and killed him. It was self-defense. They should have. And I've heard some people say that, well, you can't really tell just from a video what's going on in that case, because it is on video. You've probably seen it on the news. That's nonsense. to file a felony charge that could end a police officer up with life in prison, you better have beyond reasonable doubt to begin with. And that video alone shows reasonable doubt. There's a reason why I'm supported by law enforcement, most notably Sheriff Tommy Johnson. That's the only law enforcement endorsement that's been issued in this race since I announced my candidacy. Going against the police makes us all less safe. We need to support our police, and business as usual just won't cut it at the DA's office anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Calvi. Mr. Gieger, 90 seconds to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Galen Gieger. I am running for district attorney. I have done for 23 years what the other candidates talk about doing. For 23 years, I have been in the courtrooms fighting for victims, and it has been my pleasure, and it's been a great responsibility. Here in Oklahoma, I went to law school. I went to college here in Oklahoma. I've raised my family here in Oklahoma, and this community is important to me. I have dealt with some of the most violent crimes that our county has dealt with. I have obtained death penalty convictions. I've tried over 100 jury trials. I quit counting at that point, and I've been doing this, as I said, for 23 years. The relationship with law enforcement in the Oklahoma County DA's office is not broken. In fact, I'm going to take 15 seconds and ask the law enforcement officers that I asked to come and support. If you guys would stand and get recognized by this audience, I would appreciate that. Thank you for what you do every day. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to stop people from clapping, I guess.
Thank you for what you do every day. I work day in, day out with these men and women. I staff their cases, and I realize the importance of what they do. The relationship is not broken. The relationship works very effectively. Our conviction record shows that. My personal trial record shows that. And it is very important to have someone with the experience to know when charges should be filed and when charges should not be filed. And hopefully in a few moments I'll have an opportunity to readdress some of those things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Last but not least, Mr. Robert Gray. Thank you. 90 seconds.
Good evening. Like you said, my name is Robert Gray. I'm running for district attorney for Oklahoma County. I'd like to thank my wife here. The kids stayed at home. She's here, so they won't be interrupting us. And I'd also like to thank my dad for being here. Thank you to NonDoc and to News 9 for having us out here and giving us this opportunity to speak. You know, we have a lot of issues facing Oklahoma County, and we need to get out in front of those. I believe I'm running because for three reasons: leadership, service, and fairness. Also, we need to be out there. We need to work with mental health experts. We need to work on addiction, and we need to back our law enforcement officers. A little bit about me: I'm from Oklahoma. I grew up in Edmond. I went to school here. I actually did some credits here at UCO also. So I'm familiar with the community. I'm familiar with the area. And I know, or I feel like I know, what the citizens of Oklahoma County want. They want a safe community that they can go about their business, send their kids to school, raise their families, and be left alone. And that's what I want for the citizens of Oklahoma County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's give that round of applause. I know you guys were holding it in. There we go. Okay. Let's get right to our first round of questions. The title of this round is Storme Jones on Negotiable Instincts. I think that's funny. Where are the other lawyers here? Okay, no? All right, great.
Trace, we got one.
There we go.
Hey, this first question is going to go to Mr. Gieger first, and then we'll work our way down. Where did you go to law school, and what was the most important lessons you learned there?
In law school?
Yes, sir.
I went to law school at Oklahoma City University several years ago. And the most important lesson I think I learned in law school is they teach you how to think. They don't teach you necessarily how to practice law, because I think you go to law school and they teach you the fundamentals, but when you come out, you really don't know what the day-to-day is. They taught you how to apply evidence to the principles of law, and that is what has served me throughout my career as a prosecuting attorney, because, quite frankly, the law should be blind. Our symbolism of our country shows that. Lady Justice has a blindfold on. It should be applied equally no matter who you are, whether you're a citizen, whether or not you're an elected official, whether or not you're a law enforcement officer, whoever you are, whether you're an attorney. And for that matter, I have applied it that way for 23 years, and I can give you specific cases where that has been applied. I'm grateful to the educators at Oklahoma City University. They taught me well, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to practice law here in the state of Oklahoma.
Mrs. Ford, 60 seconds, same question. Where did you go to law school, and what was the most important lesson?
Perfect. I went to the University of Oklahoma. The most important lesson, that's a question I haven't been asked for over 16 years. I think it would be the power of humility and being able to humble ourselves and recognize what our role is in society. As lawyers, we are helpers. Whether you are a criminal defense lawyer, or a prosecutor, or a family law lawyer, or civil litigation attorney, your job is to help people through some of the most trying times of their life. And one of the things that law school really taught me was being able to perceive the world through a perspective that was not my own, and to see how the law in its application can affect different people, and that justice is rarely a black and white decision. Justice for one person can feel incredibly unjust for another. And so as we apply the constitutional principles that we've all sworn an oath to, we must do them equally and fairly and humbly.
Thank you. Commissioner Calvi, 60 seconds, same question.
Thank you. I'm from Oklahoma City, but I attended Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. And I think the most important lesson I learned there, first of all, was what not to do, because Georgetown's a very liberal school, and they did not have a very good example, in my opinion. But it shocked me into recognizing what really is important. Among other things, I would say a reverence for our U.S. Constitution. I went into law school thinking, like some do, that, anybody who's charged with a crime must be guilty and this sort of thing. But I had a professor there who said something very interesting. He said that having a vigorous criminal defense bar in a community provides a systemic deterrent against overreach or accidents by the police and prosecutors. And that sunk in. I call myself a constitutional conservative, and that means I revere the entire Constitution, and that includes 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments, as well as 2nd, 1st, and 10th. Thank you.
Mr. Gray?
Yes, I graduated from Oklahoma City University in 2007. The most important lesson I learned, and something that bothers me on a daily basis, and something that I would bring to the office of elected, is professionalism. That was something that was ingrained in me early on throughout the education, and something that has gone through all the way through, and something that I strive to do today. That's be professional every day. It's to show up and do whatever job you do to the best of your ability, whether you're sweeping the floor, taking out the trash, an officer, a prosecutor, a defense lawyer, whatever your role in society is, be professional at it and do the best that you can every day and show up every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got the second question from Ms. Ford. What are the primary philosophical and obligational differences between working as a prosecutor and working as any other type of attorney?
Well, from a prosecutor standpoint, you do not have a client. Most lawyers, especially in private practice, have a client, and your ethical obligations are to protect that client's interest and to advocate for that specific client. A prosecutor's role is different. Although they are advocates for victims and they are advocates for justice, their role is to serve all of us. And we have these conversations specifically in Oklahoma County. I had it just yesterday with a prosecutor who was struggling with balancing that role and who your obligation is to. And it is a tough balance because you not only are required to advocate for victims of crimes, but you also must advocate for the truth. And you must be a person who is honestly seeking the truth, even if the truth does not support your position. And that is a different obligation from a number of lawyers.
Wonderful. Commissioner Calvi, same question to you. What is the primary philosophical and obligational difference between a prosecutor and other types of attorneys?
I think Ms. Ford's answer was a good one. I would say, in a sense, of course, the prosecutor's client is the people, and in one sense. But there are restrictions on prosecutors for what they can and cannot do and say in that obligation. I would say the role of the DA is to enforce the law with an emphasis on public safety under our constitutional system of government, as well as other statutory obligations of the district attorney's office. The focus really ought to be on public safety in that matter. The focus, of course, for a defense counsel is going to be, upholding the constitutional, evidentiary, and other rights of their client. And as I alluded to earlier, that's a very important role. And I respect ethical defense attorneys who do so, like Ms. Gray and Mr. Ford. Mr. Gray and Ms. Ford. But I think that for the prosecutor, you need to focus and be the advocate for public safety.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gray, same question to you.
Yes, the prosecutor's role is to do the right thing every time. There is no leeway. There's nothing that you cannot give on that. And they must enforce the law as it is written. It's not a time for politics. It's not a time to play games. It's a time to do what is right. And what is right is what the law says. Now, for other areas of the law, it varies. I've represented people that have been accused of harboring poisonous snakes. What was our role there? Our role was to defend the client's interests. I've also done civil cases in federal and state court. I've done criminal cases in federal, state, and municipal court. There you have a client. Oftentimes in civil court, you have a client that is a business. So you have to maintain that perspective as you go forward as a lawyer and as an attorney, and know what your role is in the system.
Thank you. As much as I want to know more about the snakes, I'm going to go ahead and move to Mr. Gieger. Same question to you, sir.
The role of the defense bar is an important part of our criminal justice system, and I share my defense lawyer friends here on the podium's opinion of that, because it is essential. The power of the state is significant. But prosecutors have an additional ethical obligation that doesn't apply to any other attorneys. And being a prosecutor, I would know that, because it's an additional ethical responsibility in our ethical code that applies only to prosecutors. And that is that we simply not advocate to win or lose, that we see that justice and fairness be done. That's what, again, I have done for 23 years. In fact, just this morning, there's some defense lawyer acquaintances I have in this court, in this forum, that saw me doing just that, advocating on behalf of a criminal defendant who was facing the death penalty, who I did not feel was getting appropriate representation to the level that the law requires. There's a Supreme Court case called Ake. There are Oklahoma State Court of Criminal Appeals opinions that refer to that, indicating that at that point, I, as the prosecutor, have an ethical obligation to step in and bring those matters to the court. And again, I noticed some head nods. It was a relatively contentious argument, but it's something that I had to do.
Thank you.
It's something I have experience doing.
You've got the whoa sign, so there we go. But thank you very much. It's an important conversation. Storm, you have the next question.
Yeah, I think most everyone mentioned ethics. Speaking of ethics, Commissioner Calvi, you've been endorsed by House Speaker Charles McCall, who did serve as a witness for the recent Oklahoma County grand jury in the indictment of Representative Terry O'Donnell. McCall played a role in advancing the tag agent bills that resulted in O'Donnell's indictment, but so far McCall has not been charged with a crime. What do you know about the pending charges against the former Speaker Pro Tem and his spouse? And if the case does remain active after the election, would you recuse yourself due to the endorsement from the Speaker?
Well, I'm not sure what the Speaker did testify about. The grand jury proceedings, of course, are secret. So I would say the only thing I know about it is what I read in the paper about it. But I will say that, of course, there are several allegations of corruption in state government right now. Swadley, CLO, et cetera. I've stood up to corruption, even stood up to a sitting governor of my own party, Mary Fallin, when there was a big health department scandal and a scandal involving her state finance officer. And I got to cross-examine that person, Preston Dorflinger, at length for a special investigative committee. So, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. If there is a reason to recuse, certainly I would. That's the only right thing to do. But I'm not afraid to stand up to fight corruption, even when it would involve my own party, and I have a track record to prove it.
We do have a question coming up about corruption at the Capitol, but just specifically you said you would recuse yourself if there was a reason to recuse yourself. Is his endorsement of your campaign reason enough?
Legally, it's not. And again, I don't know, what he testified to. In other words, if he was testifying in favor of somebody, that might make a difference.
Okay, Mr. Gray, what do you know about the Terry O'Donnell indictment we've been discussing, and how does the DA know when they should recuse themselves?
Yeah, so as far as Terry O'Donnell goes, Representative Terry O'Donnell, I only know what I've seen in the newspapers. I have talked to some attorneys that know him well, just offhand, because I know I was running for DA, and asked me what I thought. And I said I don't really have an opinion one way or the other because I haven't seen much about it other than what I've read in the papers. As far as when you know to recuse, it's one of those things, we have it in our ethics code, and you'll know. You'll know when the time is right. If you've represented, for instance, in my case, if I'm lucky enough to win this election, people that I've represented, I can't turn around and prosecute them. So there's a good example of when you would need to recuse. If you have a direct connection to the case, if you have a financial interest in the case, there's some examples I can think of.
Thank you. Mr. Gieger, what do you know about the former Speaker Pro Tem's indictment, and when would you recuse yourself in any case?
I know very little about the former Speaker's indictment. What I do know is that I have actually prosecuted other state legislators like Randy Terrell and Debbie Leftwich. In corruption, I've prosecuted judges, I've prosecuted attorneys. It's interesting, Mr. Calvi sponsored a bill not too long ago that would prohibit a district attorney from indicting a legislator or an elected official on a state level. So I'm curious as to why he would say that he is very opposed to corruption and fighting it when he actually has sponsored legislation to keep district attorneys' offices from doing that. As far as recusing goes, I don't disagree with what Mr. Gray said. If there's an appearance of impropriety or if you do not feel like you can approach it fairly and justly, then you have an ethical obligation to recuse.
Let's get to Ms. Ford about the same question, and then we'll give Commissioner Calvi a chance to respond to that. Go ahead, ma'am.
Sure. Like the other panelists, I know about this situation only by what I've read in the papers. I know that it may or may not pass a sniff test, right? Recusals and ethics mean that you cannot advocate and move forward on something that you have a personal interest in. With regards to whether a district attorney should recuse, clearly the cases that I am representing the accused in a criminal defense case right now in Oklahoma County, I'm going to have to recuse from. I think you can build Chinese walls. I've actually engaged in conversations with some of the prosecutors about how that's going to work out. But certainly an endorsement alone, I do not think gives rise to a need to wholly recuse. I don't think that someone believing in you politically necessarily means that you would fail your oath. I think you have to test your own sense, and if you're wondering if you should recuse, you probably should. And you have to make that determination on a case-by-case basis, and the other lawyers and judges are going to hold us accountable to that as well.
Mr. Calvi, we'll give you 30 seconds to respond to the bill Mr. Gieger was making.
Exceedingly misleading. So what that bill did was it would have said that those cases would be filed by the Attorney General's office, and here's why. At the time that I filed that bill, there was a rogue leftist prosecutor in Travis County, Texas, that's Austin, who was harassing the governor of Texas, Rick Perry, because he didn't have to face the voters statewide. He only had to face the voters in one very liberal county. So it was an abuse of office by a prosecutor there to go against somebody from the other party. I found out after I'd filed the bill that the Attorney General here already has the ability to take over prosecution from a DA, and therefore I dropped the bill once I found that out.
One thing I think is interesting is that the Attorney General's office is, of course, appropriated by the legislature, so sometimes that poses an interesting limit on the Attorney General's maybe, appetite. We have an AG debate tomorrow night at OCCC, 5:30. Tune into the same stations to watch that. I want to give Mr. Gieger 15 more seconds to respond back to what Mr. Calvi said. Let's get into this a little bit. I'll give you 15 more to close it, Mr. Calvi.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're sponsoring legislation off of some allegations about a DA in Texas, I don't understand it. The fact of the matter is we had prosecuted a very hotly contested matter against a very prominent Republican in the legislature named Randy Terrell and a senator named Debbie Leftwich. I'd also prosecuted, not through the district attorney's office with Mr. Prater, a sitting district judge who had also engaged in corruption. The timing of the bill was following very high-profile coverage of those trials, and what it said is that any sitting DA cannot file a criminal charge against an elected official. That's ludicrous.
Mr. Calvi?
Again, it was in response to a situation that was already going on elsewhere. I want to make sure it didn't happen here. And if you want to talk about public corruption, the most corrupt public official in Oklahoma is David Prater.
Well, we'll get to that in just a minute.
You should have ran against him 4 years ago then, Mr. Calvi, not now.
Okay, we have some fact-checking to do for our Youth Central Media students. That way you guys are here. I've got the next question of this round for Mr. Gray. One of the strong and controversial powers of America's criminal justice system is civil asset forfeiture, a process by which law enforcement officers and district attorneys can seize private property, such as cash or vehicles, on behalf of the government without charging their suspects with a crime or prosecuting them. To what extent and when would you use, as a district attorney, would you authorize civil asset forfeiture, sir?
Yeah, so I've actually defended several of these, and oftentimes you will get charges with them. The problem I have with it is when officers go in, take money, property, cars, planes, boats, and then no charges are ever filed, no evidence is ever found of a crime, and then we have to litigate that asset forfeiture for years. And that's very frustrating for citizens. So, if elected, my office would take our duty very serious. I'm not saying to dissuade officers from going after individuals and trying to go after their assets, and our office will do that if it is within the statutes and if it is within the law. But we're not going to be going out and using our position as a cash grab or a property grab on behalf of the state.
Mr. Calvi, same question to you. To what extent, when would you, as district attorney, authorize civil asset forfeiture?
I think Mr. Gray covered it pretty well, but I would say that I don't think it should never be used, but I do think it should always be, whenever it is used, should be done with a greater mind perhaps than is there right now with regard to the constitutional rights of the property owner. It seems to me that if it is done as a way of, say, policing for profit, that's not a good incentive to put on society, and we need to police that. So when I would look at these kind of situations, I would try to ensure that people's constitutional rights were being properly respected in that matter. But I do think there are some situations where it may be appropriate.
Thank you. Ms. Ford, 60 seconds to you.
I have a history of opposing the policing for profit mentality around the old way of dealing with civil asset forfeiture. I've spoken to the Senate, I worked alongside legislatures, and we brought case after case after case where individuals were having their property seized. One of the cases that I remember, and it's been years, where a young man had $8.61 taken from him because he had a marijuana roach in the car of his ashtray. Here's the deal. For a civil asset forfeiture to be appropriate, there must be a clear nexus between the asset and the crime. The fact that a criminal has an asset, but it's not necessarily connected to the crime, does not mean the government gets to come in and take that. I think that's a clear violation of their constitutional rights, and I believe that that's why civil asset forfeiture reform has been reined in significantly in the last several years. Criminal enterprises should not profit from their criminal deeds, but prosecutors should not profit if they don't have probable cause to file a charge and to bring criminal charges as well. So I think it's a balancing test that if you're going to say the money is dirty, you better find the deed dirty too.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gieger, same question to you.
My experience is that prosecutors are not profiting. Come and look at the quality of our office and the office furniture that are in it. The law is in place. We follow the law. It's not a hard question. I think Ms. Ford's right. There has to be a nexus, but if there is a nexus, absolutely we should go after it very forcefully and very efficiently, because criminals should not benefit from their criminal acts, not here in the state of Oklahoma, not here in Oklahoma County. At the same time, the law is in place, the law should be followed, and if that nexus is not there, it shouldn't be done.
So you don't have the constitutional concerns that maybe Commissioner Calvi does?
I don't think we should deprive people of their rights, their constitutional rights to their property interests without due process. But the law is in place to protect that.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's the end of round one. Round of applause for everybody. Thank you. If I'm texting with the audio and video people, I promise. Second round is called the police and the jail. We're going to have 2-minute answers for each question from each candidate, but first we've got a quick show of hands.
On June 28th, the same day that you all will be on the ballot for this race, Oklahoma County voters will be asked to approve or reject $260 million in bonds for construction of a new county jail. Please raise your hand if you are planning on voting yes to that proposition.
I'm going to put it halfway up.
Why?
Why? Because a new building will not fix the jail's problems.
But when you go to the ballot box, what do you think you're leaning toward?
I want to get some more information, to tell you the truth. What I have seen is, do you understand that we're still averaging more than a death a month in the Oklahoma County Jail? Someone died this week committing suicide because they weren't being managed properly and they weren't being watched. That's got to stop. Ms. Ford and I have had conversations where the contraband in the jail is unbelievable. I've had defendants who are facing murder charges who should be watched very, very carefully, OD, because they're getting illegal drugs inside the jail. It has been mismanaged. The jail trust has not fixed the problems. And so we can build a new building, but until you change the way that people are being managed in that facility, control the illegal activity that's going in that facility, make sure people who need to be watched and protected from themselves are doing that, it's not going to matter how many new jails you build. So a total plan, including that, should be presented to the voters. It's one of the reasons my office has pulled out of the jail trust, because they don't listen to law enforcement. Oklahoma City Police has to pay someone overtime to stay in the jail because patrol officers will bring in arrested defendants to book them in. But it takes the jail so long to administer that book-in process that they had to hire overtime officers to stand there and watch them until the jail takes physical custody to get our patrol officers back on the street. It is mismanaged, and it is a ridiculous exercise of the way it's being run.
Thank you very much. I want to give a minute or more to the other candidates. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll be.
Hey,
I don't need any help, but thanks. Mr. Calvi is on the trust, and I'm very interested in hearing his position on this matter. The opposition to the bond has made their voices so loudly clear and they're echoing what Mr. Gieger is saying right now. And I'm not sure there's ever been a moment in time, Galen, where we agree so strongly on something, and this is it. It really makes me happy. We must rebuild the jail. Period. The end. There's no conversation about it. It has been a nightmare since it went up. It is not safe for the detention officers. It is not safe for the inmates. And it is not safe for the public defenders who spend hours in that building every single day. I know because I have experience in that. I have been trapped in attorney-client rooms where I cannot get help because the button doesn't work. People are dying in their cells because the emergency button doesn't work. Every single one of those pods has a viewing observatory space, and it is never full. We have to find a way to invite and encourage qualified people who care about the role of detaining the accused. And it is a very different process than detaining the convicts. And if we as a community do not do better with that Oklahoma County Jail, then the blood and death of every one of these people lies on our hands. And we have to do something different. But with that money and with the new facility, we have to have a real serious conversation about leadership and how we're going to move forward so that people don't die.
Mr. Calvi, she mentioned your name, that you serve on the jail trust. That is a question. What is your opinion?
Absolutely. First of all, we absolutely need a new jail. And yes, a new jail will help a lot with some of the current issues in the jail. A new jail that's better designed. Nobody, and I mean nobody, builds 13-story jails anymore. A new jail will require a lot fewer staff to be able to maintain it, thus freeing up staff to take care of other issues. Contraband occurs in every jail, everywhere, especially fentanyl. That is the new scourge, and we would not be getting a new jail but for the jail trust. Previously, the operators of the jail did not have the confidence of the public. The last time a vote was up, it only got 15% support. This one's polling at 70% plus. It's going to pass, I hope, by a large margin. People didn't trust the former operators of the jail. The violence level in the jail is way down since the trust took over. The problem was that the former sheriff, remember, he got the Black Hole Award from the Oklahoma Press Association, just wasn't releasing the data. There's over 80,000 records of violence in the jail that have never been released to the public. We found this out when a federal judge required the sheriff's office to digitize those records here about a year ago. The current trust has done a fantastic job fixing things in the jail. And for those reasons, but you can't fix 13 stories, we definitely need a new jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Let's, we're, the live stream, there's thousands of people watching at home, so let's just kind of keep it to the folks who are running for office, please. I appreciate it. Mr. Gray, 60 seconds to you.
Yeah, so most people in Oklahoma County in their day-to-day lives, they won't go to the Oklahoma County Jail. They've never been there. They think it's a place that we put people that have been arrested for bad things, horrible things. True. We also have people down there that have committed petty crimes, misdemeanor crimes. They're in that same jail with violent offenders. I think part of our role as a district attorney is to set bonds and hold people in that jail. And whoever's in that jail, the DA's office has a say in whether they can get out or not. I think the DA needs to be very smart on who that they're recommending stay behind bars, violent criminals, I would suggest, and who they should let out. I think they should take the record of the offender into account before making recommendations for bonds that are so high that somebody cannot make and get out of there alive. I would say also that mental health support is huge, and we need to be screening individuals that enter the county jail for mental health issues. Are we a mental health warehouse, or are we a county jail? Do we need a new county jail? Absolutely. If you don't believe me, go down there. I was there last week. Walk those floors. Go in the stairwells and see what it's like.
Thank you very much. We have the next question from Ms. Ford. As Storm, you start to ask that, I'm going to adjust your microphone, Ms. Ford. Stay where you are.
Okay. On average, folks in the Oklahoma County Jail remain there at least 100 days. Some say the DA's office needs to clear its caseload more quickly to help keep the jail population down. Ms. Ford, you are a criminal defense attorney running to be a prosecutor. How does a DA enforce the law and protect the public but also limit incarceration levels?
Listen, these are some of the conversations I've been having for the duration of my campaign. The district attorney's office, although they have the vast power of the state, at the end of the day have limited resources, and we have to refocus where we're spending that money. We must file charges on people faster. Every law enforcement officer that I have spoken to, when I ask if you had to get your cases to them sooner, would you do it? The answer is yes. My understanding is the filing pool is incredibly understaffed. So the law enforcement brings their charges, and it can be months before people are charged, and some of these folks are accused of incredibly violent crimes. Victims aren't getting justice, the defendants are in some sort of limbo, and the dockets get clogged up. Right now, they're doing double dockets on arraignments. We only have 6 district court judges, so we have to focus our resources and our priorities on the people that we are most afraid of, not the people that we're most mad at. The second thing that we're going to do differently is we're going to have a district attorney at arraignments. In Oklahoma County, I'm not going to put a number on it. Every inmate is arraigned via video with one specific judge. The out-of-custody arraignments, the district attorney's office is not present. They're not having a meaningful conversation about the crime, about the evidence that they have about this individual. So some of our most dangerous offenders are being released without having an advocate from the state of Oklahoma. On the other side, we are also detaining people for long periods of time on incredibly high bonds who have specific case and individual things about them and characteristics that do not require them to be detained on a high bond. We cannot keep people in a jail in which people are dying monthly because they are poor. And a huge number of the individuals at the county jail are poor, and they can't post a $200 bond. The first time they're going to see their public defender is 30 to 45 days. By the time they get to a judge, they've pretty much paid their due to society. So we have to focus where our energies and efforts are and prioritize it from the role of the district attorney to lessen the pressure valve on that jail and to clean up the dockets.
Commissioner Calvi, same question, 2 minutes.
So, excellent answer from Ms. Ford with regard to making sure cases get filed more quickly. That is, charges filed. That is very key to processing those cases. We need to prioritize, as a district attorney's office, those cases where the person is in custody. I realize it doesn't come out of the district attorney's budget when somebody languishes in jail longer than they ought to, given the procedure there, but it does come out of the taxpayers' wallets, and we need to be conscious of that, and we need a district attorney who recognizes and works well with others, not just their own office. The jail should be for public safety, not a debtor's prison. Right now, most of the people in that jail are there because they have been deemed dangerous, and they need to be in jail. However, there's still a significant number of people being sent to jail for doing nothing other than missing court on a cost docket. Now, I'm going to sound like a bleeding heart liberal here for a second, but bear with me. Liberals and conservatives should agree with this. Right now, if somebody's convicted, they have fines and fees assessed to them. Some say they're excessive. That may well be. But if they're required to come back to court, sometimes monthly, in order to explain why they haven't paid their fines and fees, it's because they're poor. And the problem is, if, number one, good luck trying to explain to your boss why you have to take a half day off work every month to go down to the courthouse for that. Number two, stuff happens in life. One of those times, something's going to happen. Sick kid and you can't get child care. Flat tire, your ride doesn't show up. Or, let's face it, many of these people aren't the sharpest pencils in the box, and they might miss court because they forget. But that's a lousy reason to put somebody in jail. What we need to do is not make the system reliant on fines and fees. We need to lobby the legislature to fully fund the judges, DAs, and public defenders. And to the extent we are still collecting fines and fees for legitimate reasons, for instance, like restitution to victims, we need to use civil debt collection methods like tax intercepts. That's a much more efficient way of doing it. It's much more humane. We're actually costing more to the taxpayers to jail these people than we are collecting in the fees, and that's wrong.
Mr. Gray, how does the DA enforce the law and protect the public but limit incarceration numbers?
You know, I think it's identification of who the defendant is and what we need to do with them. Are they a violent offender or are they a nonviolent offender? Do they have a history or do they not have a history? What have they been doing? What have they been up to? What are their goals? Where are they going? You know, a lot of that falls on their defense lawyer to inform the prosecutors what they're doing. But it also falls on the prosecutors to remember that public safety is our number one priority. And with that, we have to identify individuals that may have an addiction, individuals that may have a mental health issue, and get them the help and support that they need. Again, as Ms. Ford said, there's people that we are scared of. Yes, they need to be in jail. There's people that we're mad at. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the case. So with that, you have to, it's a delicate balancing act, and I agree. But I also want to reiterate one thing. The charge pool is a problem. There is too many people, and there's a human element to this, every time someone is arrested and every time someone is charged. And when people are awaiting charges, whether in custody or out of custody, it is interrupting their lives. And that has to be changed. I don't know how many people have complained to me about that, but if I had $1 for every single one, I wouldn't be standing up here running for office. So that's something that needs to be done, something that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed day one.
Mr. Gieger, 2 minutes, same question.
Repeat the question so to make sure I
Yeah,
understand.
it's how does a district attorney enforce the law and protect the public while also limiting the incarceration numbers?
I'm not sure that the job of the district attorney is per se to limit incarceration numbers, but in regards to some of the things that my opponents have said, they take a rather simplistic view of it because when someone is arrested, the way you don't get incarcerated is don't break the law and don't get arrested. But once you are arrested, certain things have to happen before the DA even has those charges. For example, the arresting officer has to make reports. Those reports have to be given to supervisors. Supervisors have to approve them. If it requires further investigation, it then needs to be assigned to a detective who may have 20 or 30 new cases on their desk that morning. They then need to prioritize how they're going to further investigate those crimes to find out whether there is enough evidence for us to make a charging decision. Once that is brought to us, and that can take days sometimes, maybe even longer than that, then the DA has to review it and meet with those detectives to make a filing decision that is ethically supported by the evidence and the law. Then a charge pool gets it. Now, let me say this. I deal with some of the most violent and some of the most disturbing cases on a daily basis. It's the division, the DA's office that I supervise, the sex crimes and the child abuse division. Those charges are filed timely within 10 days. The law in the Oklahoma County has a procedure to allow for an extension of 10 more days for good cause shown. I would challenge you to find any case that I have worked on within the last foreseeable future where that was not made. I'm unaware of cases like Ms. Ford said where violent offenders are simply just released because charges don't get filed by the DA's office. I take exception to that. That's not the case.
Thank you very much. Mr. Calvi, I've got the next question to you. Since 2020, current District Attorney David Prater has filed charges against at least 7 Oklahoma County Jail employees for allegations that include falsifying records related to suicide, smuggling in contraband, assault and battery, and cruelty to prisoners who were handcuffed to a wall and forced to listen to Baby Shark on repeat. You've been very critical of Mr. Prater for charging police officers with crimes. But what about county jail employees? You serve on the jail trust, as we've discussed, so what's been your analysis of the charges brought against the jail staff in the cases that I just named?
To be very clear, the large majority of those cases, at least, were filed against the former operators of jail, not the jail trust employees. The problem, the difference, there is a difference between having somebody in custody and mistreating them and a police officer who has to make a decision in a life or death situation within a very compressed time frame, just seconds. In those kinds of situations, I do think we need to support our police. With regard to jail staff, we have some excellent, very hardworking jail staff. They deserve a new jail too. But if one of those abuses somebody who is already in their custody, that obviously has to be treated as a serious matter. Even criminal defendants have a due process rights and rights not to be abused. So in those instances, I do think that some of those prosecutions, at least, were appropriate, and I do think that we need to make sure that the rights of all are upheld, including those who are inmates in the jail.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gray, same question to you. What is your analysis of the charges brought against jail staff, and how do you view the obligation of the DA's office to oversee jail administrators?
Oh, absolutely. The district attorney's office has a duty to enforce the law, and if the staff of the jail does not want to follow the law, then they'll be prosecuted just like the people that they're supposed to be watching over. It's something that has to be done and must be done to maintain order within the Oklahoma County Jail. It saddens me that you go down there and you meet some wonderful people that work at that jail, and it's a very difficult job, just as much as policing is also. But corrections is a difficult job, and they have the task of getting up every day, going down to a jail, and watching people that are charged with crimes that, frankly, you wouldn't talk about with your kids in your living room. And they do that day in and day out, and there's several good ones. So with that being said, yes, you have to prosecute the ones that are causing problems to maintain order there. But I will reiterate that those people deserve a nice workplace too, and a safe workplace, and the current situation is not that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gieger, the next question is for you. We wanted to silence those cell phones, if I recall right. Okay, there we go, great. I feel like that might have been a law enforcement officer who has to take that call legally, so maybe I'm wrong. Mr. Gieger, same question to you about prosecuting folks who work in the county jail.
We've talked about the jail, and I've given some strong opinions about the jail. On the evening that OCPD had to respond to the jail due to a hostage situation because of mismanagement in the jail, my understanding is there were 4 jail employees working in 13 floors. Mr. Calvi went on the radio on March 11th, 2019, and said guards are beating inmates to death and leaving them to die on the floor naked. That's significantly different than the way he's characterized the situation in the jail right now. The short answer to your question is where I began my opening statements, and that is if individuals who are placed in a position of authority over others violate the law and break the law, they should be held accountable. But it has to be done based on evidence and the law, and they must be treated fairly given the situation that they're dealing with.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ford, same question to you.
I don't even understand why there would be any controversy around prosecuting members of the jail staff who are committing crimes. Not only is it a position of power, it is a position of extraordinary trust. Folks who are incarcerated are deprived of their rights to have a phone to call for help, to defend themselves. They can't go get their own food. They can't get their own medicine. So we have to rely on the folks who are observing and taking care of them, and we must be able to trust that they're doing it in their best interest. The number of cases of folks dying that we are blaming a fentanyl overdose How is the fentanyl getting into the jail? Because I know my clients are searched, cavity searched if they're arrested at the jail or at the courthouse, and then they're searched again when they get there. We have to focus on how the drugs and the contraband are getting into the jail. And if it's not coming in through the inmates, then it's coming in through the employees. And what are we going to do? And how do they balance whether or not an employee has to go through being searched? Well, we have to do better at screening and hiring and training. I don't see any reason why an employee of the jail doesn't go through a metal detector, who isn't subjected to drug testing. And if they're suspected of bringing drugs into the jail, why are they not being searched? Who is in charge over there that is allowing people to die repeatedly of fentanyl overdoses? And this has to be something that we focus on. So is it the employees? Do they need to be prosecuted? Yes. And if it continues to be a culture that goes unchecked, then their bosses are going to have to be prosecuted as well. Because the lives of the Oklahoma County Jail inmates matter. Whether they're guilty of their crime or not, they have not been sent there to die. And if you are violating their rights and committing crimes as an employee of the jail, you better be expected to be prosecuted by me.
Thank you very much. Mr. Calvi, you were named in Mr. Gieger's answer, 15 seconds, that radio quote. I've heard it bandied about before.
Well, we've had several lawsuits against the county for things involved in the jail. It's actually a lot worse than has ever come out in public. As I said, the former sheriff was not at all transparent. The current jail trust is transparent, and that is why you hear some more things now than you may have in the past. But there were situations in which inmates were abused. There were cases in which, in some cases, there were prosecutions of jail staff. And I will point out that that is the small minority of people who work in that jail or have worked in that jail. None of those people are currently still with the sheriff's office that we were referring to there, but there was some inmate abuse. And as far as I know, those people were prosecuted, and they're not any longer at the jail or the sheriff's office.
15 seconds, Mr.
Sure. It's the reason that the sheriff's deputies have endorsed me and their FOP has endorsed me, because you go on the radio and you say things like, your guards are beating inmates to death and leaving them to die on the floor naked, when it is not true. A district attorney cannot say things that are not true, that inflame the public, impugn the reputation of jail employees and deputies in this county, and it's just flat irresponsible. And now to walk it back and say, well, there were some really bad things going on, and so that's why I said it. It's not the mentality nor the responsibility nor anyone you would want running the office that has the power of the district attorney's office to say things like that and then not own up to it when asked about it.
Mr. Calvi, a final 15 seconds.
Seen the lawsuits and the prosecutions. There were mistreatment of inmates at one time, and that's what I was referring to. There are situations, they're very rare, they're very unfortunate. The only law enforcement endorsement that's been made since I got in this race is the sheriff.
And you and your wife gave
endorsed
him
me.
thousands of
And that's
dollars
why,
in his campaign.
That's why he has endorsed me.
Thousands
that's why
of dollars.
That's why I'm
And you
endorsed by
promised to
former
build him a new
prosecutors.
building?
Are we going to allow somebody just to talk over
I'm
me
sorry,
or
you do
interrupt?
not want the
Let's
facts
talk
to come out,
about,
Mr. Calvi?
okay, I'm endorsed
Let's just
by
talk about the
former
facts. Did
prosecutors.
you and your wife give him thousands of dollars? You did, didn't you? Almost $6,000 together you gave
Who
him.
are,
Let's
if you're
let him-
impugning the character of Sheriff Johnson, good luck
I'm just
with that,
saying the
buddy.
truth.
It is the
All
truth
right,
that he has endorsed
the next
me.
question. Let's move on, guys.
Thank you, Storm.
This first question, Mr. Gray, you'll have the first crack at this, and we'll rotate through. We know some of the most high-profile cases that any district attorney must handle involve allegations of police using excessive force. Some of these cases involve the death of citizens. As district attorney, Mr. Prater has prosecuted and convicted several police officers, which has put him at odds with the local police unions. Police officers do have a difficult job and must make split-second decisions, but when they are wrong and make mistakes, people can die. What would be your philosophy when reviewing such cases for potential charges, and what are your standards for police accountability? 2 minutes to Mr. Gray first.
I'd like to start by saying that I want to thank the men and women of law enforcement. They have a very difficult job. They drive at times of the night that I won't get out, and they drive on streets of this community that I won't drive on. And so I want to thank them for doing that job. As far as prosecuting officers, it's a tough and weighty decision that should not be taken lightly. It shouldn't be taken lightly by any prosecutor that looks at it anywhere. What you're looking for is you're looking for the law, and did they follow the law or did they not? Did they follow their training, their policy, their procedures? Did they do what they were trained to do? And if a law enforcement officer is out on the street by themselves, it's 2 in the morning, and they have a car pulled over, the windows are dark, and they don't know how many people are in there, should they be thinking about who the district attorney is when it's time to act? No. No, they should not. They should be thinking about, what am I trained to do? What are my policies and procedures? And act accordingly. That way, at the end of the day, they can go home to their families. And that's what's most important. That's what's most important to me as a citizen now and as an elected official also, as the elected district attorney. Those men and women in law enforcement have a difficult job, and it should not be taken. In this culture that we're in currently, it's not a popular job. We have to remember that they have their job to do, just as the prosecutor has their job within the system, just as the defense lawyer has within the system. So I would say, if they've violated the law, they violated the procedures, and they violated policy, then yes, we would have to prosecute them, unfortunately.
Thank you. Mr. Gieger, 2 minutes, same question.
Repeat. I want to make sure I answer your question. Repeat it.
What would your philosophy be when reviewing such cases concerning law enforcement, potential charges, and what are your standards for police accountability?
Sure. I don't disagree a whole lot with what Mr. Gray just said. You have to look at the law that is applicable given the situation, because different law enforcement interactions, there's different laws that are applicable. You have to look at the totality of the circumstances. What you can't do is look at one video and make charging or filing decisions, as I've heard represented from this stage. You have to look at the interviews that were conducted after some type of a use of force was made as to the reasons why officers did it. We now have body cams, and I'm grateful that we do, because you have different angles of body cams that might be at play that you need to look at so that you're not relying on one video but on many videos. You need to find out exactly what transpired before and led up to that. You need to understand if the officers had prior contacts with the individuals that they're dealing with. There's a multitude of questions that go into making charges and filing decisions like that. With that being said, I work closely with law enforcement and detectives every day. I teach law enforcement on how to go about their job, how to do investigations, how to present evidence, and how to interact with the DA's office. We have an ongoing working relationship that's very, very good. Every FOP that is endorsing someone in this race has endorsed me. There's 8 of them. Every law enforcement agency on the east side of Oklahoma County has endorsed me. It's because of the relationships that I have with them that I've built over 23 years, and the way that they know that I screen and look at their cases, whether it involves cases against citizens or whether it involves cases against use of force. I have tried and I have prosecuted officers who have used use of force. Randy Harrison was a Del City police officer that Mr. Prater and I tried together. And there was some criticism and there were some objections about what we did, but the jury convicted him because the jury followed the path we led them to, and that is based on the law and the evidence. Was this a proper or an improper shooting whenever that officer took the life of a young minority? I continue to do the same thing as DA if I'm elected.
Ms. Ford, 2 minutes, same question.
My experience with law enforcement is different than a lot of the candidates up here. One, I'm the granddaughter of an Oklahoma City police officer. I've had the privilege to also teach Oklahoma City police officers at the OSU Training Academy. I've represented Oklahoma City police officers and officers from other agencies. I've given them advice when they haven't been charged. We've talked about how to do better when there are things going on in their careers that maybe they need some guidance and help on, and trying to honor their confidentiality here, counsel them on how to be the best officers that they can be. I've also had the privilege to hold some of them accountable when their work and their investigations fail to meet a level of standards and expectations that are expected from the Oklahoma City Police Department and expected from our communities. Some of the finest officers in Oklahoma City have come up to me after trials and said, I learned more being cross-examined by you than I learned in years at the academy. When prosecutors are looking at whether or not to prosecute law enforcement, I think they have to look at the whole person. I expect that if I'm being looked at and being prosecuted for a crime that's outside of anything remotely aligned with my character, that the prosecuting person would look at that. I think we should do that with most individuals, but specifically with law enforcement. We want to look at the whole person. What is their history? What does their disciplinary action look like? Have they jumped agency to agency? Is there a reason for that? And my conversations with the Oklahoma City FOP, who have not endorsed anyone on this stage yet, have included having conversations about how to train law enforcement officers to meet the community's changing expectations and demands of how they're going to enforce laws and deal with the mentally ill. The police are hungry for a leader in the district attorney's office who's going to help them be better and not face being charged. And I think that we can build that bridge and we can work together. My experience as an educator of lawyers and college students and law enforcement officers is going to help us do just that. We'll have a police accountability unit where law enforcement is sitting at the table and they get to talk about the officer that we're looking at. We're going to be mindful and we're going to treat them with the same dignity and respect I would expect anyone on this stage would want to be treated with when prosecuted.
Mr. Calvi, 2 minutes on your philosophy on prosecuting police officers.
Sure, I addressed this in my opening statement as well, but basically when police officers are in a compressed time frame when they're under threat, it is wrong and it is dangerous to second-guess them and armchair quarterback a prosecution that could threaten them with life in prison for a decision they have to make in seconds. Obviously not everything every law enforcement officer does is right. There are cases that do need to be prosecuted. But when you're in those kind of situations, like the 5 Oklahoma City police officers we're faced with, they do not need to be prosecuted. They need to be supported. We need to support our police, not persecute them. We don't need a woke, George Soros-funded DA. We need to have somebody who's going to go in there and stand up for law enforcement. That is why the only law enforcement endorsement that's been issued since I got in the race is Sheriff Johnson. That's why he's supporting me. Why don't you ask him? And then that way we'll find out that it is because I do stand up for our law enforcement. I worked with law enforcement, military and civilian law enforcement every day when I served with the Army. And I know that you have to have that close cooperation. That's not there right now between the leadership in the DA's office and the leadership of the Oklahoma City Police, and we need to make that better. The other thing we need to do is avoid gotcha game prosecutions like this one against the 5 cops. Let me tell you about another gotcha game prosecution. There's a young African-American combat veteran named LaRue Bratcher that is being wrongfully prosecuted right now by David Prater and Galen Gieger. He shot a guy trying to rob his business. He called the police. They responded, told him he didn't do anything wrong with that. They did find out that his business license, a marijuana grow business, had lapsed, so they took him down just to arrest him for that. He bonded out right away. But when the DA's office got a hold of it, they prosecuted him for murder, and Galen Gieger personally increased that charge to first-degree murder. That's wrong. It's a wrongful prosecution. And I wrote the state's stand your ground self-defense law. And we need to make sure that we stand up for the rights of all people in self-defense, especially somebody who is a combat veteran and deserves better than what he's getting from the DA's office.
Mr. Gieger, 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I have to be careful how I respond because it's an ongoing investigation. I did not personally make the charging decision in that case. Mr. Calvi's incorrect, but he's been incorrect about a lot of things. But the point of the case is this, is he is not entitled to self-defense under the law that Mr. Calvi authored. It was actually copied pretty much from a law that already existed in the state of Florida. But what that law says is if you are engaged in an illegal activity at the time, you're not entitled to assert the stand your ground. He was operating an illegal marijuana grow. He owed thousands of dollars and needed in compliance to bring it up to where he could have been licensed. So that law, the way it was authored and the way it should be enforced, is not applicable to him. The other side of that is I think the evidence will show that, number one, he was standing behind a steel door that he was not going to be able to get into, and it wasn't a warning shot, as Mr. Calvi has said in other speeches that I've heard him give. He was on a monitor, and he could see exactly where this young man was standing, and he drew down and he aimed intentionally and fired.
In keeping with how we've done this, we'll give Mr. Calvi 15 seconds and then 15 and move on.
That's a lie. He did fire a warning
Go
shot.
to the
You can
jury
see it
trial
on the
and watch
video.
what happens.
let
You
him
don't know
have
the
it.
Got to
Let's
gain
have
prosecution,
15
just
seconds.
like the prosecution against those 5 officers, and Galen Gieger is responsible for upping that to first-degree murder. That's gun control, effectively, folks. That's against the right of self-defense, and we need to stand up for the right of self-defense for all people, black, white, no matter what your religion is. And this young man is not a threat to anybody, and he deserves
He is to
not
the guy
be
he
in
shot
prison.
and killed.
Mr. Gieger, 15 seconds, and then we're moving on.
Everything he just said's not right. It's just not true. And he doesn't know the evidence. He doesn't know the case. And he is making statements for political favor, and that's what he's done throughout this. That's why he doesn't know the case about the 5 officers that shot. He doesn't know the evidence. He knows what News 9 showed. And he's standing up saying, I'm going to dismiss cases based on what I see on News 9. Well, God help us all if the district attorney makes decisions based upon what
God
News
help us
9
all if you
writes.
wrongfully prosecute police officers and a young combat veteran.
All righty, Trace.
I've got a question for Mr. Gieger. There we go. Okay.
Great.
You have worked under David Prater for several years, and many folks wonder how similar or different you would be if elected. Prater is a former police officer, and at least in my estimation, he sometimes seems to use criminal charges or the threat of criminal charges to stop behavior he considers improper. Beyond convicting police officers, Prater has also charged numerous public officials with campaign and corruption crimes because the Oklahoma County DA has jurisdiction over any state government matter that occurs here in the capital city. How much time should the Oklahoma County District Attorney devote to investigating and prosecuting alleged corruption in the state of Oklahoma?
Well, in the Oklahoma County, I think is where our jurisdiction lies.
Well, but people file their taxes here. People, send an email from here. Those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what the DA is charged with, and that is to enforce the laws that are applicable within Oklahoma County. There are other agencies that have concurrent jurisdiction. You've referenced the Attorney General's office. You might ask the Attorney Generals who are running as to how they want to be involved in those types of things, because they certainly have that jurisdiction as well. But when other law enforcement agencies will not step up and fulfill their obligations, even though another agency may have statewide jurisdiction and it seems that that's the appropriate agency to do it, then I think it's incumbent upon the district attorney to do the same thing I've said he needs to do in every case, and that is look at the evidence that's available and apply it to the law, and if in fact a crime has been committed that should be prosecuted, that is what the responsibility of the district attorney is. I have been involved in a lot of the cases I think that you made reference to, at least the ones that were successful. And in fact, every public corruption crime that I have been involved in resulted in either a plea eventually based on the evidence or a guilty verdict based on the jury trial that I did.
I appreciate it. Ms. Ford, 2 minutes to you, same question.
Give me the question one more time, Mr. Savage.
How much time should the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office devote to investigating and prosecuting alleged corruption in the state?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer on a time basis based upon the question, but I think the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office has an absolute obligation to root out and prosecute political corruption. We are watching right now as a number of cases of alleged political corruption are happening. When we are stealing taxpayer dollars to our own financial benefit and violating our ethical codes and obligations to those we're called to serve, either as a representative or appointed official, that's some good old boy cronyism, and it's 2020. We're done with it. We have to start prosecuting these folks, and if their jurisdiction is appropriate in Oklahoma County, I intend to prosecute them. I don't know how to answer your time question, Mr. Savage, so I want to be honorable about that, but as much time and energy as is necessary to protect the Oklahoma County citizens and the taxpayers who are trusting these folks to do the right thing.
Well, to quote Easy Rider, I'm hip about time. Mr. Calvi, 2 minutes to you.
As I mentioned earlier, yes, there are some allegations of public corruption out there that do need to be investigated, and I have a record of standing up to even sitting governor of my own party, Mary Fallin, when there was corruption in her administration. But let's talk about the corruption in the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office right now. David Prater is the most corrupt public official in Oklahoma. He abuses his office and threatens people with prison for simply disagreeing with them on things. This prosecution against these 5 officers is one example. What he did to the Pardon and Parole Board. Look, I'm glad that Julius Jones was still kept in prison, but when a man's life is at stake and you're up for a death penalty conviction, part of the process is the Pardon and Parole Board. Obviously, I support the death penalty. I've gotten people sentenced to death. But right before they're supposed to rule on clemency, you file a grand jury against them, a grand jury that, by the way, gets no indictments. How humiliating the DA's office, Mr. Prater, that they couldn't even get a single indictment. You can indict a ham sandwich with a grand jury, but they couldn't indict anybody at the Pardon and Parole Board. That was a gotcha game thing again. How about the refusal to file charges against things like former State Representative Cruz, who allegedly sexually assaulted a woman in her own home? And yet the DA's office announced, what was it, last week, that they're not going to file charges? They said that the victim is not cooperating. She says she is cooperating. I trust her, not the DA's office on this. How about initially refusing to file charges referred by the Oklahoma City Police regarding a assaulting student at Mount St. Mary's? Eventually, after the heat came too high in the media, they filed charges. And by the way, aren't these sex crimes? Isn't that Mr. Gieger? That's your division at the DA's office. So we need to do a better job filing these kind of charges. How many women, how many girls could have prevented being raped or sexually assaulted if you had agreed to file those charges initially? And let's talk about the problems in corruption in the DA's office, the Judge Henderson case. Judge Henderson is Prater's former law partner. Is he telling the truth, or is the employees at the DA's office telling the truth about that? Either way, Prater needs to recuse on that. He should not be handling that case.
I believe he has recused. 2 minutes to Mr. Gray. We'll fact check that, though.
He has.
Yes, the role of the Oklahoma County District Attorney and any district attorney is not to play political games. It's not to take a political football and throw it around. And that's oftentimes what you see. And if I'm elected DA, that's not something that I want to participate in, not something I want to be known for. I want to be known for doing the right thing when it may not necessarily be the popular thing, but we'll always do the right thing. How much time should we devote to public corruption? As much time as necessary. If we're aware that there are crimes being committed, if we're aware that there is public corruption within our county, within our jurisdiction, we have a duty to our taxpayers who pay our salary to investigate those crimes. And if there's a crime there, to prosecute those that are responsible. It's not something that we can turn our head the other way because they're either in our party, not in our party, said something about us on the news we didn't like, said something at a party that we didn't like. That's not what this game is about, because it's not a game. Like I said earlier, there is a human element to all of this, and oftentimes that is lost. Public officials go through a lot to get to where they are. They go through a lot to run for office. And once they're there, we put our trust in them to make decisions that we think are best for us as citizens. If they're engaged in public corruption, that trust is broken. So yes, as the Oklahoma County District Attorney, we must root out public corruption wherever it exists. But not only that, but corruption as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have 15
love-
seconds to?
I would
Okay, well,
love
we're
to.
running late, but I do feel
Well,
like questions about sex crimes are
When
relevant.
you make your statements as DA based on what's in the news, you make mistakes. The grand jury returned a scathing report, and I would encourage the public to read that, not listen to Mr. Calvi about the Pardon and Parole Board. Mount St. Mary's involves juveniles, and I'm not going to comment on that, but I would assure you, Mr. Calvi, that those cases were investigated and the appropriate action is taken, and in fact, the investigator who worked on that case.
Too bad more
Sitting
women
right back
got
there.
sexually assaulted and raped because you dilly-dallied.
The investigation as to Senator Cruz, the investigator who knows the victim is uncooperative, is sitting right back there. If you want to talk to him, he can tell you about it. His name's Scott Blankenship. And there is an ongoing investigation, and a grand jury, as I understand it, has been summoned in regards to the allegations against former Judge Henderson, and Mr. Prater has recused, and that's common knowledge as well.
10 seconds, Mr. Calvi, anything?
Well, there again, decisions on not prosecuting sex assault crimes is a big problem.
They haven't, listen to what I'm saying, they've been filed.
They need to get, no, you didn't file them. You still haven't filed on some of these. And maybe it hits a little too close to home with you about not filing sexual assault charges, but we really don't need a DA who ignores those things.
Thank you very much. Okay, end of round two. Round of applause. We're going to go to 90-second answers in this round. These questions are only for the individual candidates that we ask them to. First, a quick show of hands. Storm, we've talked about, I'll just ask it. We've talked about a lot of important issues tonight. We've got the Democrats coming in about a 10-minute break after we finish this. Raise your hand if you would be willing to commit to debating your Democratic opponent for the general election. Oh, sure. All 4 of them. Great. We'll be here. We'll see you then. Okay. Storm, you've got the first question this final round to Mr. Calvi.
Yeah, this question, 90 seconds only to Mr. Calvi. Commissioner, at the Fraternal Order of Police Forum in November, you said, quote, "There are occasions I've exaggerated about something in order to make a political point." As the only candidate here who could be remotely described as a career politician, someone who's once threatened to set himself on fire on the House floor, how would you respond to voters who fear you will play politics with the power of the DA's office? 90 seconds.
Sure. So, first of all, being a legislator and drawing attention to issues is very different than administrative role like I have at the county now, like I had prosecuting for the Army, and as a DA, where I did not do those things. So the famous novelist Flannery O'Connor said, "To the hard of hearing you shout, and to the almost blind you draw large and startling pictures." The state Supreme Court was in a habit of illegally striking down enactments by the legislature by deliberately misinterpreting federal jurisprudence on those matters, particularly with regard to laws to protect unborn children. And in order to draw attention to that, I waited until there was a bill up that would have provided a pay raise for the state Supreme Court. And I said that if I wasn't a Christian, to protest this, it would be appropriate, or I'd be tempted to set myself on fire. I suppose today, if I were to do it, I would say, to protest this, I'll climb the Devon Tower. That's probably what I'd do now. But fortunately, it did draw attention to that issue. And I'm happy to report that the state Supreme Court, it kind of spooked the Judicial Nominee Commission appointing at least one person who was conservative in each round, and the state Supreme Court now has a majority of people who do rule in favor of those laws. So sometimes drawing attention to an issue using political theater can be appropriate for a legislator, but that's not what I'll do as a district attorney.
So just to be clear, what would you say to folks who are worried that you would play politics in the DA's office? 15 seconds, quickly.
Well, the politics are getting played by the current DA, and that's something that I don't, that I want to stop, not continue.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gray, I've got the next question for you, 90 seconds. You were an assistant district attorney for just shy of 2 years in Oklahoma County. You resigned to go through the Edmond Police Academy, which I don't believe you completed. Years later, you now want to be district attorney. Why did you not stick with either of your prior law enforcement jobs to gain more experience for this position?
So my time as an assistant district attorney, I appreciated Mr. Prater hiring me in that role, and there was a time to transition into law enforcement at that point in 2009. I did not make it through that and had to move on with life. But for every door that closes, another one opens. To be honest with you, I did not see myself, almost 13 years ago, so July of 2009, standing here talking to everybody, trying to run for district attorney. It is something that has presented itself and something that I thought about for a long time. So to say that why didn't you stay in these law enforcement roles to gain experience to run for DA, I think I've gone to a different role and gained vast experience practicing law across the state in federal, state, and municipal courts all over. And I think that experience probably better equips me for the role as district attorney, because I've seen numerous cases, civil and federal, numerous forums, numerous lawyers, attorneys, prosecutors, and thousands of clients since. So,
All right,
thank you.
Mr. Gieger, in December, 3 young women filed a civil lawsuit alleging sexual misconduct by your son and negligence of supervision by you. However, the lawsuit was dropped 2 weeks later. One of those cases was investigated by police, and your office recused from the charging decision. Cleveland County District Attorney Greg Mashburn ultimately decided not to file charges, although some wondered why he was assigned to the case since he formerly worked in the Oklahoma County office. You said this lawsuit had political design to affect your campaign, but an Edmond mother believes you used the power of your position to unfairly influence the investigation. How do you explain this situation to voters?
Well, the situation that I explain to voters is this. Whenever you occupy a position of power like this, people take shots at you. They've taken shots at me on many cases that I've tried. Right before Christmas, an unverified petition naming my family was filed. 8 business days later, it was dismissed. It was never served on me, but it was certainly served to the news media, and they ran stories on it. It was dismissed without me knowing who some of these people even are, and in fact, it contains many false allegations of conversations that I was alleged to have had with people I don't even know. If that doesn't ring of political motivations, I don't know what does. There's not a lawyer in this room who would not question a lawsuit being filed and then dismissed 8 business days later with no explanation whatsoever and never even being served. The false claims were investigated, and rightly so. Our office immediately recused when we learned of them. 3 different law enforcement agencies, not just Greg Mashburn, but 3 different law enforcement agencies investigated this. It's now been almost 4 years, and they're still trying to bring this up. It has been looked at and relooked at and relooked at because of my position, not because of the strength of the evidence. In fact, Nolan Clay, who wrote an article on it, said that the determination was made that whatever it was that this young lady has said happened to her wasn't a crime. It didn't constitute the elements of the crime. That's published in the Daily Oklahoman. I'm assuming that he's accurate in that based upon his investigation. I have a letter from the Edmond Police Department saying that it was looked at by 3 different law enforcement agencies, including the Attorney General's office, and all of them found it to be completely insufficient, and it is simply a lie. And quite frankly, people talk about not wanting to do things for politics, but when you bring someone's children into a politically motivated attack, quite frankly, it's disgusting. I'm not going to make my children, I'm not going to make anybody else's children part of a political campaign or use them for political gain. You're not going to see them in commercials because that's not the appropriate place for kids. This is a false allegation. It is a lie. And let me say this. As DA, one of the decisions I make every day as an assistant prosecutor is realizing that when false allegations are made, because false allegations are made, if those things are carried out and the truth is not found out, it affects people's lives in devastating ways. And every investigator in this room that are shaking their head with me right now understand that when we staff our cases, we have an obligation to figure out what is truthful and what is not truthful. And to use something like this at this point for a political purpose, quite frankly, is appalling to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey,
Thank you very much, ma'am. We'll chat with you after the thing. Thank you very much. Ms. Ford, last question to you. You were arrested in 2009 and detained in 2010 after incidents that allegedly involved alcohol and confrontations with law enforcement officers. Charges were filed but dismissed in one incident and no charges were filed in the other. Were the officers wrong in both instances, or did you do something that you regret?
I'm happy to answer these questions. The incident at the fair was me advising a young man who was surrounded by 5 law enforcement officers, interrogating him and his friends, and he was scared, he was shaking, he had tears in his eyes. I'm observing it from afar, and I said to the young man, "You have a right to remain silent. You can use it." In the business, we call that contempt of cop. I was arrested, I was handcuffed, I was taken back, where I met Oklahoma City police officers who I knew well, and I was given the choice. I was given the choice to go sit at the drunk tank and no charges to be filed, or we'll plaster your face all over the front page of the Daily Oklahoman, charge you with disorderly conduct, obstruction of justice, and whatever else, and you'll beat us in court. But Ms. Ford, the damage will be done.
So you
I had
chose
been
the
a
first
practice-
one?
I had been a practicing attorney for a very short period of time. I had an incredible amount of respect for my then boss, Bob Ravitz, and I wasn't going to bring that kind of embarrassment or humiliation to him. I see that officer who arrests me all the time. He regretted the choice by the time he got there, and he asked them to release me early, and they did. Because sometimes in this business, we make emotionally charged decisions. And those emotionally charged decisions, like Mr. Gieger just said, have long-term impacts. But here we are, some 12 years later, and this is the conversation we're having. If you want to have a conversation about what happened up at the lake, there was a bar that apparently, unbeknownst to me or anybody else in that bar, was illegally serving alcohol on a Sunday. Apparently it's dry. When they ran the tabs, my card was on file for my sister and all of her 20-something friends celebrating the end of the summer. All of them are bartenders and servers. I said, just put it on my card and we'll sort it out later. He called his buddy, the law enforcement officer. He came and arrested me and a number of other people for the same kind of jam. I think it was disorderly conduct, public drunk, and resisting arrest. We went to court. I had a conversation with the district attorney. He asked me to please come in and visit with him and law enforcement and give a full detailed explanation of what happened. I laughed and said, only a fool represents themselves. This is an arraignment. I wasn't expecting it. He said, we have a real problem with what happened to you and to your family and your friends, and we want to talk about it. We went and sat down and had a conversation about it. All the charges were dismissed, every one of them. I did not expunge nor ask to hide those records, because I want my clients to know, and every other person, that good things happen, bad things happen to good people, and people get wrongfully arrested all the time. Didn't plead guilty, wasn't found guilty, wasn't convicted of a thing, and my political opponents leaked that story with the intention to tell you that I'm not qualified to be a district attorney. I am qualified. I've been arrested. I've been wrongfully accused. I have defended folks. I've been in that county jail. It is not a pleasant place to be. And I can stand here before every single one of you, including you, Mr. Savage, who I understand had to ask the zinger question, and say at some point a wrongful arrest is a wrongful arrest, and we can start talking about things that are more important and valuable, and knowing what it feels like is what makes me a qualified candidate. I'm not afraid of it, and I'm not ashamed of it.
Thank you very much. Real round of applause. That's the end of the rounds. We're going to give you 2 minutes, Ms. Ford, to start our closing statements, and you can take it to whatever topic you'd like. 2 minutes to you.
Well, I want to thank you guys again for having us here. I think that the four of us could probably stand up on a stage and debate all night if you gave us the opportunity, and I know we're running late. I am a lifetime Oklahoman. I have been serving my community most of my life, certainly my adult life as a lawyer. I am an educator. I train lawyers. I train law enforcement officers. I volunteer my time. I provide pro bono services. I work up cases for folks all of the time. I serve on boards of nonprofits. My heart is the heart of a servant. Making the choice to close my very successful private practice to be in this role was one that I had to really pray about and get serious with my family about the financial sacrifices and the burden that we were willing to take on such an important, powerful role of trust. It would be my honor to be the voice of change. It would be my honor to help rebuild policies and changes and work alongside the Oklahoma City Police Department and the good, fine officers, many of whom are here, who I have a really good, healthy relationship with as well. We have a real opportunity to bring positive change to Oklahoma County, and I think I'm the best candidate to do it. I am committed to bringing integrity, transparency, and accountability to that role, as the role of district attorney, as I said in my opening statements, has the most day-to-day impact on each and every one of our lives, whether you're a law enforcement officer, a mental health provider, a victim of a crime, or a person who's committed a crime or been accused of a crime. The person in this position needs to be a person that you can trust and who has experience in representing all kinds of folks. And my experience is not as Mr. Gieger's, 23 years in one office. I have a wide variety of experience representing victims as well.
Thank you very much. We've hit the 2-minute mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Calvi, 2 minutes to you.
Thank you. So I appreciate that 3 of us up here want to see change. Ms. Ford, Mr. Gray, and myself recognize the need for serious change in the district attorney's office. I'm the only candidate here with a proven record of fighting for conservative causes. I prosecuted terrorists for the Army. I did everything other prosecutors do, just did it wearing body armor with a locked and loaded 9mm pistol strapped to my thigh in a hostile fire zone where you could hear a bomb detonating within a mile of that courthouse nearly every single day. The Army recognized my skill as a prosecutor by awarding me the Bronze Star Medal. After successfully prosecuting terrorists in a combat zone, I can easily manage the office prosecuting ordinary bad guys here. Where one did one's prosecuting is not a relevant matter. I've taken on public corruption, even when it involved my own party and the former governor, Mary Fallin. Unfortunately, the current district attorney's office has proven itself to be corrupt, abusing its authority to persecute those who disagree with the district attorney and refusing to pursue charges against their friends. I'll clean up the DA's office, and I'm sure, by the way, that most of the people that work in the DA's office are fine people, just a few at the top. I'll clean up that DA's office. I'll put the focus back on public safety, not political vendettas. For public safety, we need a DA who will support our police, not persecute them. That's why I'm supported by Sheriff Tommy Johnson. That's why I'm supported by former prosecutors, U.S. Attorney Bill Price, former prosecutor and governor Frank Keating, and former district attorney Rex Duncan. It is very important. We have a lot at stake in this election in a whole host of races, but with the district attorney's office, I concur with Ms. Ford that for what affects you day to day, we need a district attorney who is going to take seriously the rights of victims, including victims of sexual assault, and will prosecute fairly and not carry out political vendettas. I humbly ask for your vote June 28th.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gieger, 2 minutes to you, sir.
Thank you. This boils down to you want someone who knows how to do this job or someone who wants to learn how to do this job. The office of the district attorney is not a place for someone to go to on-the-job training. For 23 years, I have honed a skill set that makes it possible to be successful in trial. This year, my team has a 100% record. That's 10 trials just between January and now. Last year, it was in the 95% range. The reason that is the case is because these cases are very, very difficult, but you have to know what to do. You have to know what the law is. I take exception to Mr. Calvi's statement that prosecuting in alleged war criminals in a military combat zone is the exact same thing as doing a jury trial in Oklahoma County. As far as I know, Mr. Calvi's never even tried a jury trial in Oklahoma County, especially not a criminal trial. There may be some civil case he was involved in. Every day, the men and women in the DA's office that Mr. Calvi refers to will come to the DA and the supervisors in the DA's office to say, hey, here's the problem we are dealing with this trial. What should I do? What is the law? What motions need to be filed? You cannot walk into that position and know how to guide that office with zero experience. As far as I know, everyone in my office is supporting me for this, and I'm very, very honored by that. Because one thing I will agree with him on is the men and women of the DA's office work incredibly hard. They are up there on Saturdays and Sundays before trials. They do not get overtime for it. They do it because they love it. They do it because they are committed to it. And they do it because they are dedicated to keeping the men and women of Oklahoma County safe. And they do it with the leadership and the guidance of the supervisors, of which I am proud to be. I would humbly ask that you would consider voting for me for district attorney, so that you, in fact, know that you're getting a prosecutor and not a politician.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gray, lastly, 2 minutes to you.
Yes. Thank you again for having us out here tonight. Again, my campaign comes down to leadership, service, and fairness. And that's something that we have to take serious every day. As the top prosecutor for Oklahoma County, we have to be prepared to do the right thing every time. We have to be prepared to do what is right when everybody else says you shouldn't do that. That's wrong. That's political suicide. And that's not what this game's about. That's not what this job's about. I have the experience from representing clients, like I said, in federal, state, and municipal forums all over this state to take all that experience and bring it to the DA's office and bring about a knowledge base that it's difficult to find, I would say. It's difficult to get out there and do as many cases as I have. You know, they say that familiarity breeds contempt. And maybe that's what's going on here in this race. But I think what we need is we need a change. We need a new regime. We need a new district attorney. We need somebody young, like myself. We need somebody with experience, like myself. We need somebody to come in here and take us forward into 2023. We don't need to go backwards. We need to go forward. And I believe that's what my vision is for this office. My vision is to be smart on crime. My vision is to support mental health and addiction. And my mission is to support the men and women of law enforcement. Because again, that is the backbone of our society of civil rule. That is who stands between us and the bad guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause to everybody. We're going to take a few minutes break. Thank you to our candidates for participating. Public debates matter. Thank you for everyone who's here, for our sponsors. We're going to take 10 to 15 minutes. We'll be back up with Democrats. Please take the conversations with these candidates outdoors into the foyer there. Thank you again.